Time to get started. So it is very apropos that Penelope is able to join us here today because we're going to start off with a little bit of a throwback, a little bit of a story from my own life that hopefully will connect to the parasha. You can judge me later if it does. So, as most of you know, Penelope and I met while we were both living and working in Japan. And in addition to being a wonderful and splendid human being that she is, she also had one enviable perk, which was she had a TV with a VCR in her apartment.
Oh.
Very, very nice. Very. Well, that wasn't exactly the hook, but you know, it certainly sweetened the deal. And she wanted to share with me many of the things that she had grown up enjoying when she was in England. And so she got a copy of a TV show from England called Red Dwarf, which is a science fiction comedy type thing. Plot's unimportant. You can look it up online at your leisure. But there was a problem, because when she put the tape in the VCR and hit play, we got out
Japanese.
And
English together.
Japanese and English.
Oh.
The tape was bilingual. It had Japanese dubbing and the original English voices, but the initial setup on the TV didn't distinguish between one or the other, and both of them were coming out the speakers simultaneously.
Interesting.
Interesting, yes. So you get to watch a show and have two versions of the dialogue coming out, one in English, one in Japanese, completely overlapping. Tricky. Tricky. And this was something, of course, that she wanted to share with me. She's like, oh, this is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Watch this. But I'll tell you, if we sat very, very still and paid really, really careful attention, you could hear the English clearly enough that you could follow what was going on. You couldn't be doing anything else. Your mind couldn't wander an inch. And if you paid attention, you could actually listen and follow it. Penelope later was able to work out how the TV could be set up that it would play only the English, but there was something, a sense of accomplishment when we watched it in the more limited way and having to work to get it out. And we're going to see that our Torah portion this week of Vaetchanan has an interesting challenge to present for us, which is something similar. At least I hope that you may see. All right, following me so far? So keep that story in the back of your mind, or maybe even in the front, as we dive in. So we're going to start on page 1007. All the pages flick. We're in chapter 4 of the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim. And we're going to pick up with just a short section before we get to the main meat of our discussion on verse 5. So who would like to lead us through this wonderful exhortation and explanation of just how wonderful the Torah is? Got to be willing to read with enthusiasm.
I'll read it.
Thank you.
See, I have imparted to you laws and rules, as the Lord my God has commanded me, for you to abide by in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing of all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as is the Lord our God whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day?
So other nations get praised for having the most beautiful natural scenery. Other nations might get praised for having the biggest population or for having the greatest army. What are we going to be praised for by the other nations? Wisdom and laws. Those Jews, they got a great set of laws. They are a special people. Just look at the laws they've got. Look at the rules for their society. Look what their God has done for them and given them in their whole system based around this Torah, based around this set of instructions. It's an interesting way to praise a nation. I'm guessing that when you're planning your various acts of tourism, and you're looking through the lists of the top 10 places to see, you probably aren't looking for, I want to visit the country with the nicest laws. I want to visit the country that is most just. Am I right? But we, at least, believe that other nations will know us and will know God through us by the greatness of Torah, by the wisdom of Torah. And indeed, this is historically proven accurate. We get much accolade from other nations when they choose to give us praise, almost always based around being the people of the book, being people of learning, people of wisdom, people who create just and fair communities. So Moses, bit of a prophet. Bit more than a prophet, that's tongue-in-cheek, yes. So what are we to make then of what comes in chapter 5? So turn to chapter 5. We're going to take a look at 10:16. And in fact, if you can all promise not to turn over the page, I'm going to help you here. Go ahead and pass out the copies. Take one and pass them around. But don't turn it over. What are we going to find in chapter 5? The 10 Commandments. Or is it a 10 Commandments? Is it the 10 Commandments or is it a 10 Commandments?
It's a group of 10 commandments.
It's a group of 10 Commandments.
And it's one of the versions that's in.
And it's one of the what?
There's two. It's in the Torah twice.
The 10 Commandments are in the Torah twice, and indeed many commandments are repeated in different places. But what do you mean it's a version?
Well, it's not totally identical, is it?
It's not identical? You mean the one that we got back in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, in chapter 20, is different than the one we get in the book of Deuteronomy, of Devarim, in chapter 5?
Slightly. Yes, slightly, yeah.
Doesn't that mean we have 20 commandments then?
13.
But hold
He didn't
on.
get it right, so he had to repeat himself.
Well, wait, he didn't get it right. If one version is different than the other version.
No, the
One's
one
expounded.
No, the one he got when he was closer to God is the right one. This one has to be the wrong one because now his memory is
No,
failing.
this is the game of telephone.
This is the game. Wait, so
As you
this is the
repeat
one.
it,
Well, this is
it's
the one.
changed.
Remember, this is Moses recounting 40 years later. So are we saying that at the age of 120, maybe, his memory's a little... But didn't we just say in chapter 4 that the hallmark of our greatness is going to be our laws and the perfection of our Torah? And yet, even in the Torah itself, let alone our ability to interpret and apply it, we've got two different versions of what are often treated as being among the hallmarks of the greatness of Torah's wisdom. We can't even get the versions of the 10 Commandments right?
Well, the other hallmark of the Jews is that we argue about everything. So now we have something to argue about.
Yeah, but that particular trait wasn't held up as being why we would be esteemed by other nations.
Okay.
Okay, so let's first of all find out what some of these differences are, and then we'll discuss whether that's a difficulty or whether it's not. So you see on the sheet that I just passed out, we have a column on the left that says Exodus 20, and then we have a column on the right which says Deuteronomy 5. And then, of course, numbered 1 through 10. We have each of the 10 Commandments. All right? Okay. So let's see if we find anything different. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read from the Exodus version. That's the left-hand column. And while I'm reading, I want you to be looking at the right-hand version. Remember watching TV in Japan? You're going to be hearing one and you're going to be reading another. And I want you to see where they are the same and where they are distinct. Make sense? Okay. So, I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Same, different, or meaningless differences? Same. Commandment 2. By the way, if you have any other questions or comments along the route, please feel free to chime in. Or if there's anything that needs additional clarification. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image, or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Pretty much the same.
Well, it's different.
Where's the difference?
Under and below.
What's that?
Under and
below?
The material difference though.
The word or.
Or, right? So we got a maybe an or versus an and, maybe an under versus a below. So we got a possible difference here. We can talk about whether it's a material change or not when we get to the backside. Don't look. Commandment 3. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. Okay, so far so good. All right, well, maybe there wasn't much in this. Maybe they're a lot more similar than we thought, right? Maybe all that rhetoric about 2 different versions, bad. All right, let's see what number 4 does. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Pretty much the same, right?
No.
No? So we call the setup. So what's that? We got some differences here?
Yes.
Okay. What are the differences?
We're dealing with slavery in this and not in that.
So in Deuteronomy 5 and the 10 Commandments that we are reading for this week, there's a lot more discussion about slavery. So the reason given for Shabbat in Exodus is what? Creation, right? That we are celebrating Shabbat because we are imitating God, and just as God ceased his creation on the 7th day, so shall we. But in Deuteronomy 5, why are we resting on Shabbat?
Because the Lord told us.
Because the Lord told us to.
Slaves, so our slaves can rest.
And so our slaves rest,
slaves
and
can
so
rest.
we can experience the freedom that a free man has, which we had not experienced when we were in Egypt. And in the process of experiencing that for ourselves, we also will share that experience even with our own servants.
You also remember versus keep.
And also that very first word, remember versus keep, right? Shamor v'zachor, well, that's keep and remember, right? Zachor v'shamor, in the order that they come in the Torah. It's 2 different words, right? Remember Shabbat and keep Shabbat. In fact, this distinction is so well attested to that it's even part of a very famous song. Lecha Dodi, the first stanza of Lecha Dodi. Shamor v'zachor b'diburecha. All right, we don't agree with all of it, but this is a very famous discrepancy between the 2, and we'll talk about how our tradition handles that discrepancy in particular when we get to the back. But does this make us feel a little bit like, well, you know, I'm not sure how perfect the Torah is if the Torah can't even come up with an understanding of the justification for why we are celebrating Shabbat?
Why does one have to exclude the other?
Indeed, why does one have to exclude the other, right? But that only leads us to ask the question, if they are both reasons for Shabbat, why weren't they both written in both versions? I mean, was God afraid of running out of ink? Couldn't he have said, you will keep Shabbat because on the 7th day God rested and because you were slaves in Egypt? I mean, couldn't we have a combined edited version? Just copy all that's in number 5 and stick it in with Deuteronomy 5 and stick it in with Exodus 20 and copy everything in Exodus 20, stick it in with Deuteronomy 5, make one giant explanation for Shabbat, and then they can both be harmonized.
If they couldn't, it would be a stretch when we got the 4th commandment to add slaves to it, because we were a tribal people, barely scratching to keep things together. We were moving. Were there slaves that got out of Egypt where we had just been slaves and immediately we owned slaves? That doesn't...
Right, so one explanation could very well be that the Exodus version, which doesn't emphasize our servants as much, although it does mention having servants and letting them rest, but it's not emphasized.
Yeah.
Perhaps that didn't emphasize them because we were not as an established people. We didn't necessarily have any servants working for us, so it didn't need to be mentioned so much.
We didn't have flocks.
Right, but 40 years later, we've had a few successful campaigns against those that had attacked us. We've been able to secure a lot more territory along our march. So now we are maybe a little bit more established. We may not be settled so much yet because we still have to get into Israel, but we've got more. So now maybe we need to emphasize that more. But are you saying then that the Ten Commandments change based upon the economic or social conditions of the people? And that God got it wrong the first time? Or it wasn't as... It wasn't...
No, he got it right both times.
But doesn't that mean we should be updating it constantly?
Possibly.
I'll go tell the Sofer.
I think it will be somewhat like adding amendments to the Constitution. Rather than changing the original wording of the Constitution, you add an amendment so you still have a record of the original words and they won't disappear. You'll have the old reading and the new reading and you won't confuse things. It makes it more clear.
So you mean similar to the fact that the amendment instituting prohibition is still considered an amendment to the Constitution. We just have another amendment which says that that first amendment no longer applies. But we didn't actually go in and say that the other amendment doesn't exist.
It doesn't erase the original.
It's just as you keep reading, you realize it's no longer operative. Do we get to edit the Torah? Do we get to amend it, the Torah?
What do you call the Talmud?
What do you call the Talmud? Okay. What do you call the oral tradition? So this is a long-standing point of discussion, debate, of what does it mean to edit, to add or subtract, as is famously described in this chapter as well, or in this parasha, and what does it mean to apply in ways that seem a little bit more over here or a little bit more over here, depending upon circumstances. And the answer is, if you change the words, you've added or subtracted. If you make the argument that the words of Torah themselves should be altered, that someone should go in with a little knife and scratch off the words from the Torah and rewrite them as something else, then you are definitely adding or subtracting from the Torah. On the other hand, if our interpretation of those words through debate and research and according to our tradition leads us in one time or another to apply it a little bit this way or a little bit that way, then that's normal judicial application of law, not the creation of new law. That's the general breakdown that our tradition settles for.
That's very nice. When you say keep Shabbat, it doesn't say like 2 candles before sundown. So even the word keep may be ambiguous. You may need some further explanation.
And that's primarily what the Talmud does, is give further explanation and application. It doesn't seek to erase or to institute something that is not felt to be part of Torah from the beginning. But explanation versus addition, that can be a fine line. And that is definitely something that we always need to work as a group on. That's why no single rabbi makes decisions that would completely change the interpretation as understood, because we want to work with others to make sure that our interpretation has a place within that long chain of tradition and understanding.
I think it's a brilliant way to keep the history of all the laws from day one. That way it's never erased, it's never removed, and you can read through the whole thing. And by the time you get to the current law, you can see where we started and where we are.
Absolutely. And in fact, when we make interpretations of Jewish law to this day, we go through the entire, what we call Masorah, the chain of tradition, to make sure that our understanding is not only of what the most recent law application was, but that we understand how it came to be that way and what the chain brings with it as far as reasons for interpretation and application. So yes, we never throw anything away. That's why Jewish libraries get very, very big, and why Jewish answers get longer and longer over each century, because we have to understand and explain all of the intermediate steps of Jewish law along the way. So yes, it's very good, but still, it's a little unsettling that they're so different, right?
To me, I see that God has allowed for the maturation of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Because
40 years later.
40 years later, if he had put that in Exodus, we weren't ready to read that we would have slaves. We were just ourselves slaves, and those people probably could not imagine having their own.
Mm-hmm.
How could they do that to somebody else after having just been that way? But it allows for the progress and the evolution and the maturation of people. I mean, even the fact that at some point Moses is told to organize things.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like that right at the beginning. That happened later on.
Actually, in the same parasha that we get the Ten Commandments. And
But it allows for maturation, and I think that it shows a wonderful understanding of human nature and the growth of people.
not to take away your feeling of wonderfulness, but in the book of Exodus, right around the same time that we are receiving the Ten Commandments, we do receive other laws that explicitly deal with the issues of slavery or indentured servitude, if you like, and how one would treat or not treat them. So it's not as though we didn't get any information about servants of that nature until 40 years later. So it at least was a topic of conversation 40 years prior. So it could have fit into the Ten Commandments as well without being completely out of place. All right, let's keep, one more comment, then we'll keep moving through our 10.
Regarding slaves, wasn't that a way for the person to pay off a debt?
Indeed, the most common form of what is referred to as slavery was actually like a form of indentured servitude, that someone who had gone bankrupt for one reason or another would be able to sell themselves, their labor, for a period of time, and they would then be taken care of by someone else while they provided their own labor. So yes,
wasn't that for a much more organized society?
Well, you'd be surprised. People can fall on hard times in just about any type of society.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the tensions within Judaism, is making sure people don't, and then also making sure that you help them even when they have. But let's go ahead and continue, because we're only on number 4, so we're only 40% done. Although they get a lot shorter as we move on. So keep looking on the right-hand side as I read number 5. Honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land that the Lord your God is assigning to you.
Fair.
Yeah, we got some differences. What's the difference?
That we should live well.
We have the "and that you may fare well" addition. It's not only long living, but also that it will be good living. And a reference that God has commanded you. So this puts it into a more third-person cast, that Moses seems to be saying, remember what God told you about honoring your parents, make sure you do that. Why? So you'll long endure, quote, and that means also do well, returning to the quote, in the land that God is giving to you. So slightly different tone. Does that mean Moses is just sort of sharing his recollection of the Ten Commandments rather than doing a verbatim recount? Is Moses interjecting his own interpretive phrasing rather than simply saying, this is word for word what God wrote on the tablets? Or we're not sure. Because remember, if there's one set of tablets coming off the mountain, which one was carved on it? The Exodus one.
Okay.
Well, that was very quick. Thank you for solving 3,000 years of discussion. Because
Because the Exodus version is the one that's written
the time that we're receiving them.
So the Exodus 1 was written at the same time, so therefore you might be inclined to say that. I could also argue, as some has, that the Exodus version is a shorthand, that the fuller version is the Deuteronomy version, which, with the exception of the explanation of Shabbat's creation, tends to include all of the material of the Exodus 1 plus a little bit more. So therefore, maybe the longest version was put onto the tablets, but only the shorthand version was the source of the verbal promulgation. So we could argue the other direction.
Or the reverse.
Well, if you see Mel Brooks' History of the World,
I bring to you
there's three
the
tablets.
15, the 10 Commandments. Exactly.
So you never know.
You never know. You never know. And of course, that movie is always a wonderful way to remind ourselves that there are not only 10 commandments. There are, in fact, 603 additional commandments. So whether one tablet fell or not, we still got plenty more spare. Okay, number 6 rather. You shall not murder.
It's the same.
You shall not commit adultery.
It's the same.
You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. I took the liberty here. If you read very carefully in the Hebrew, there are some slight differences in spelling and slight differences in whether or not there's a vav in places, but that's a much more detailed analysis of whether it makes a substantial difference or not. And we're not going to get into that today, but just as fair reporting to let you know that there are some very, very slight grammatical differences between these, but they are more in-depth than we're going to do today. All right, and last but not least, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female slave, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's.
Interesting.
They reverse? The order is changed. Anything else?
Added his field.
They
Added the field. Mhm. And they added a second word for a second instance of the coveting. Right. So we start off with covet the wife, and then JPS puts it as crave your neighbor's house, whereas all of that seems to be one whole list in the version that's found in Exodus. We're not going to go into too much detail on the last one, but just as an aside, there's an interesting interpretation that says the first one is speaking to a more mature person. That a proper mature person who understands the ways of the world understands that the first thing you do in life is you get yourself a home, and then you get yourself a wife, and then you get yourself some servants, and then you get your animals, and you get everything going. Whereas the younger, more immature person, what's the first thing on his mind? The woman. And so he starts off with the woman, jumping straight out of the gun. So seeking to have romance, or what's substitute, shall we say, before he's actually properly prepared to have a family and engage in what he and his wife will do together, which is to build a home and to go through everything else. So it's just a little interesting psychological take. And we can, both old and mature as well as young and impetuous, can end up coveting the wrong things at the wrong time, and all sorts of trouble can follow. But turn the page. Zachor and Shamor. So in the Talmud, a midrash is provided. Would someone like to read that first selection there? Or we carry on?
Zachor, remember, and Shamor, keep, were pronounced in a single utterance, an utterance which the mouth cannot utter, nor the ear hear.
All right. Which means it was a mystery, that it's a miracle. That don't think that God pronounced Zachor or Shamor. God pronounced Zachor and Shamor simultaneously. And that's something that mouths can't do. Meaning the human can't do that. Like the VCR. Thank you very much. But God can. Or the VCR can. But God can pronounce Zachor and Shamor simultaneously. And therefore there were not two different versions of the Ten Commandments given. There was a simulcast version of the Ten Commandments given, but only one version of that can be written at a time because of the nature of written language. What God can miraculously achieve through verbal communication cannot be miraculously duplicated in writing. It just doesn't work. And as a small analogy to that, I'm sure that most of us at some time or other in our lives have had experiences which defy our best ability to describe in written language to someone else. You know, whether it be the feeling we had at our wedding, whether it be the feeling at the birth of a child or of a grandchild, whether it be a unique moment visiting some part of Israel or some other part of the beauty of God's world, any attempt to describe it just doesn't quite seem to actually capture everything that was happening at the time and everything we felt. And words just can't quite do it. And this Midrash is saying much the same, that God spoke in a way that humans cannot speak and in a way that cannot be heard either. That the human ear can't hear this simulcast properly, correctly, at all. Does that mean we didn't understand the Ten Commandments when they were actually being given? And we've certainly explained the whole golden calf thing. But that does lead to a certain difficulty, is if we take that notion as being absolutely literal, that there was the giant heavenly loudspeaker going, and that the heavenly loudspeaker was playing both versions of Shamor Zachor simultaneously, and that was incomprehensible to the human ear, well, what good was it? I mean, that's what we call noise, not revelation. And the revelation is meant to introduce us, to raise us up, to know something that we didn't know prior to God's revealing it to us. Hence the word revelation. But if we can't hear it, because our ears simply are unequipped to take a simultaneous utterance and turn it into two separate words that then can be both digested, then that wasn't revelation, that was noise. So this has bothered Ibn Ezra, the great medieval scholar, and he, in this discussion of the differences between the two Ten Commandments, wrote a very, very long essay, which I have abridged. So we're going to try and see what his take on this whole doubleness is and what that can do for us. All right, Barry, you want to keep going?
And when we delve into the words of Chazal.
Chazal is the Chachamim Zichronam Livracha, which means the sages, may their memory be for a blessing. It's great sages of the Talmud.
What they say,
We just saw.
and this matter is even more difficult than all the all the questions that we have, as I will stand for.
Meaning, you may think, and indeed many people have treated this notion of Zachor v'Shamor b'Dibur Echad, that this was a single utterance, and but that's just a very nice kind of mystery kind of thing. It's a simple idea, a very simple teaching. He's saying, no. This is something that you have to look into, because it's not as simple to look at than everything we talked about, which I cut out.
Offend that I say they did not speak correctly. For our intellect is light compared to theirs. Rather, the men of our generation think that their words simple sense, and it is not so.
All right. So he says, I'm not saying that they were when they said that more came on utterance. What I'm trying to the way nowadays, this is generation, true for that take it as this kind of that wrong. These were wrong. It's the literal meaning that a lot of who's they just said is wrong. Even Ezra's not criticizing the Chachamim, not criticizing the sages, he's criticizing the way people read their words. Onward.
And this wondrous matter, and the wonder that Hashem spoke Zachor and Shamor at one time, it should have been fitting that this were written and read explicitly Torah, more signs and marvels which were written, and that the scheme is not like lights. words Chod and Shemot at one time, he would not this nor a single word.
Say one of it is the second I was just no hears simultaneously. They're not going to get anything out of it. Not giving them it. Secondly, if the miracle is able to speak words simultaneously, the Torah says, and God words at the same time. As much of a miracle in the sea, that's taking one thing and making it into two. Two things and making it one is even harder, as we know from finding the right person to marry. So, I was waiting to make sure people actually understand that reference. Okay, good. She is a exact finding the people to marry, parting the sea. Exodus. I just did that reverse, making sure we're all. So he says this is hard to understand why the Torah would not have made a bigger deal about this if it was that God literally spoke two words simultaneously. Keep going.
And if we say that this was also a wonder, that the ear could hear two words at one time, not in accordance with its usual custom to hear two letters, how come the Chachamim of blessed memory did not mention this, which was weightier than the speech at one time?
So, what's the greater miracle? That God can say two things simultaneously? Or that God would make a miracle that all of the thousands and thousands of Israelites there at Mount Sinai would be able to understand two words spoken as one, again as two words in their own ear? That would have been an even bigger miracle. So why didn't the sages focus on the understanding of the two words as one rather than the speaking of two words as one? It seems that that would have been the point they should have emphasized if it literally was happening the way many, many people seem to think it happened. You're following that? It's a little bit of an abstract challenge, but it is what it is. All right.
Okay. Know that the words are like bodies, and the meanings are like souls, and the body is as a vessel to the soul. Therefore, the rule of all the scholars of every language is to guard toward meanings and not pay particular heed to changes in the words, since they are identical in their meaning.
Okay. That's a big statement.
Yes.
Let's make sure we understand it. Words are like bodies, and the meanings are like souls. What is he trying to say by this? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Anyone want to make an attempt?
You can say something,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a depth of meaning behind it that you should understand. Like if your wife gives you a particular look, you know what it means, and she'll have to say that kind of thing. There's meaning below it, and we get that, or we don't, I guess.
Partly, yes, but I think there's a second aspect to it. As I sort of tried to allude to very obliquely when I said, anyone want to take a stab at it? Anyone would like to make an attempt?
Literal, something is literal, but then there's also an interpretation. It takes on an
There's a
additional
meaning.
meaning.
Right. And if you change the literal vessel that's bringing the meaning into another literal vessel which conveys the same meaning, does it matter? If I carry my groceries in a black bag, or if I carry my groceries in a red bag, does it change the fact that I'm getting the groceries from the car to the house? No. What Ibn Ezra is saying, and this is going to be quite controversial, hopefully, as we unpack this, is that the actual vessels are less important than the meaning. The actual word chosen is not that important, as long as its meaning is the same as another word. Either word could have been used interchangeably, and don't make a big deal about which one was. Now that's very different than the way most Jewish scholarship is undertaken. Most of the time we are, as those of you who are familiar with our class, are slicing words very, very thinly to see why this word rather than that word. Most of us in our own personal life, when we're paying attention to what people around us are saying, are going, I wonder why he said that. Or why did he say it that way? Or why was it that particular look? Or why did he touch his ear? We're trying to unpack all of the different cues and signs and ways that things are being transmitted, because we think it will help us understand the unique meaning of that utterance better. And Ibn Ezra is basically saying, Stop trying so hard. Okay? It is the great words of Freud. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes there is no additional meaning. It's just God had to say something to get the point across. He could have picked another word and it would have been just as good as the first word, but he happened not to. Don't make a big deal about it. Keep reading. As long as you've got the meaning, you're okay. How do we feel about that? Wow, yeah.
What did the other sages of his time say?
You're mistaken. So this was not, as you can gather, universally accepted, nor am I saying that this should be universally applied either. I think that it is a good break, that sometimes we have a tendency to overanalyze. And in the process of overanalyzing, we can distort meaning, because we're looking for gradations of difference between words that can be very, very similar, so hard that when we make the gradation, we force it to be there, we make a distinction between this word and that word, that we end up then implying differences of what we should do from having discovered that difference. So I think Ibn Ezra is right in the sense that not every word needs to be sliced into tiny, tiny pieces to make it distinct from its nearest neighbor of synonym. Sometimes synonyms are synonyms. Get the meaning, move on.
And the trick is to know the difference.
Well, and that's where we argue and discuss. And we should recognize sometimes when we come to a dead end, when we're looking for a difference, when there really is no functional difference. That there may be a poetic difference, there may be a stylistic difference, but there may not be a functional difference. Now, if there's no functional difference, then it's interesting to point out the difference and move on. Indeed, that was the way most of you responded to the differences in the first couple of the commandments, which was okay. It says below rather than under and such. You know, that pretty much means exactly the same thing. I'm not going to run out and say this one is saying that you can make an idol of a certain type, and this one says you can't. I'm not going to do that because I can understand that below and under are basically saying the same thing.
I think what happens when we overanalyze, we pay more attention to the analysis than to the meaning. And that can be dangerous.
Absolutely, and indeed I think that was part of the reason Ibn Ezra used his analogy of saying the words are like the body and the meaning is like the soul. You know, so often people pay attention in a negative way to the body, either their own or someone else's, and miss the point of the person, the soul that's within that. And I think that he's emphasizing that as well, that an overanalysis can become a focus on the analysis.
Right.
And then you've either lost or at very least made secondary the important message that's coming from this actual word or phrase. Okay. Have we analyzed that enough? Okay. Keep going.
And know that in the back of the brain of the head is locating the remembrance here. And that place is the place of the guarding of the forms. And behold, the remembering encompasses the keeping, shemira. And the meaning of zachor is that he should remember every day what day it is of the week. And all of this is so that he should keep the seventh day, so that he should not perform on it labor. And behold, the meaning of zechira is the same as that of shemira.
Okay. Ready for medieval brain analysis?
Yeah.
So Ibn Ezra's reading, and again, you don't need to run out and check out your local neurological science book to see if this is absolutely true in the modern sense or not, but his understanding, I think, still stands pretty well, which is this notion that in the back of the brain, and he did literally believe in the back part of the brain, was the seat of memory. That's where zechira, memory, or remembrance, if you want to call it, dwells. You know, you got the cognitive stuff way up in the front, and you've got the memory stuff way at the back. And there's a certain anecdotal truth to this. I know that for myself, when I try to remember something, it definitely seems to be internally focusing towards the back of the brain rather than the front of the brain. And that may just be an illusion caused by the consciousness and all of that good stuff, but I can understand why medieval thinkers would think that. And this is what he argues, is that zechira, this remembrance part, is surrounding the keeping part. Because you need the remembering to get to the keeping. Because if you don't remember what day it is, what happens? You can't keep Shabbat because you don't know which day is Shabbat. Right? If I forget that today is Wednesday, then I'm going to be off count come Friday night, Saturday. Some people working on the air conditioning in case you think we have very big mice on the roof. So the remembering implies the keeping, and the keeping implies that it's been remembered. They are functionally the same in this context, is what he's saying. So the fact that one of them says Zachor and one of them says Shamor shouldn't surprise us, shouldn't make us run out and go, woo, we got to go change, and analyze this and make sure what we're doing and see, because there's a big difference between one and the other. Calm down. When the sages said that Shamor and Zachor were said at one time, what they mean is they both basically mean the same thing. When you say one, you're saying the other by implication. Not by phonetics, but by implication. So sometimes you can say two things at once, and that's perfectly fine. You just don't actually say one of them out loud. I think we've all had plenty of occasions like that. Questions? Comments? Getting hung up on medieval anatomy? Okay. Take us on.
And when Hashem said Zachor, all who heard understood that its meaning was like Shamor, as if they were said at one time. And Moshe did not need to mention in the second relaying of the Parsha the reason of for 6 days Hashem made. For in the beginning he said, as Hashem your God commanded you, such that it was as if he had said, as it is written in your Torah, the Gvur Zachor, until and sanctify it. And because Hashem commanded...
Let me just go ahead and make sure we got all of that. Okay, so but the first part was what we had just discussed, right? That when he said Zachor, everybody who listened understood that that also meant Shamor. That's what it means to be an active listener. And when Moses said the version in Deuteronomy, he didn't have to go back and repeat all of that stuff about do it because this is the day when God rested, yada, 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 because he already had said as God commanded. And that was a hook to make sure everybody already remembered what God had already said. So rather than copying from both of them and making one giant commandment that would be duplicated in both, it was unnecessary. He could just make a reference to the previous statement in the book of Exodus, and that would be good enough because somebody who was listening would know what he meant. Of course, that's why it's so important to listen.
And because Hashem commanded that the servant and the maidservant rest, and Hashem did not explain why this was, Moshe explains its reason and said this, that Hashem commanded that the servant rest in order that you recall that you were a servant just like him in Egypt, and Hashem redeemed you.
So the reason why the Deuteronomy version goes into much more detail about the treatment of servants and their resting, and that we need to remember that we used to be a servant as well, is because since God hadn't mentioned exactly why he had told us to rest, Moses felt it would be a good idea to explain a little bit more about what God was intending us to understand by having included the servants in that rest. I mean, after all, if you think about it, if I told you, what's the best way, if I give you unlimited resources, what's the best way to give yourselves more free time? You know, you spending all your time cleaning the house, cooking dinner, taking care of the yard, painting the house, fixing the car, all of those things. If I give you unlimited resources, what's the best way to make sure that you have more free time?
Pay somebody else to do it.
Hire someone to do all of that, right? If I hire someone to take care of the yard, I don't have to do it. If I hire someone to cook, I don't have to do it, etc., etc. So if God tells us to rest on Shabbat, the shortest solution to ensuring that we will be able to rest on Shabbat is to put someone else to work. But God mentions in Exodus that that's not allowed. That we're not allowed to make our servants work on Shabbat in that same way. So instead, when we get to Deuteronomy, Moses wants to make sure, and doubly so for the generation that did not grow up in slavery, because remember, we're talking 40 years later. This is the generation who was not an adult in the time of Egypt. He wants to make sure that they understand what it was like to be a slave, so that they understand why God told them you're not allowed to use slaves to make up for your resting on Shabbat.
Is it only Jewish slaves, or is it all?
It is all. And the difficulty that I can see that you're working through is, but wait a minute, I know that there have been conventions such as often called the Shabbos Goy. I know that many organizations and institutions hire people to do work, to come and do room setups, to serve, to clean, and doing things like that. And those rules and regulations are very complicated. But our tradition did find that there were certain circumstances where the labor of others willingly done and without direct demands that it be done, specifically on Shabbat, that we are permitted to benefit from those circumstances. But it's not a simple one-line answer of how that works. It's a more complicated discussion. But it is an interesting nexus of Jewish life in a world where there are many non-Jews, and how that overlaps for the benefit of everybody involved in circumstances, and what precautions we need to take. And in many cases, the institution of Shabbos Goy was misused, where people were not treated as slaves, thank God, but they were certainly used to do things that made Shabbat less restful, both for them and for the rest of the family or community as well. So it's a very detailed and interesting subject for study, just not today. But good thinking. That's called connecting one thing to another.
You couldn't read my mind.
No.
You knew where I was heading.
I suspected where you were heading. I'm glad I was right. Any other questions or comments? So, to go back to what Malka was saying, now that we've analyzed this to death, what do we take away from this as an actual meaning for ourselves? From either the Ten Commandments as a whole or the more in-depth discussion we've had here of Shabbat? Nothing? We're going to carry home the analysis, but not the content? That's like leaving with the nice bag, but without the gift inside.
We need to understand that God gave us wiggle room
Mm-hmm.
when things are written in the Torah don't seem to apply today.
Mm-hmm.
That we examine very carefully what was written and try to discuss ways that we can overcome our feelings
Mm-hmm.
with that rule and still not abuse the Torah.
To understand something, to use it, and to live in the modern world without abusing the Torah. I wouldn't necessarily use the term wiggle room, but I might use the term flexibility.
It's the same.
Well,
meaning.
the distinction would be if I can be permitted to defend my choice of words. Wiggle room is for our convenience. Flexibility is for the rightful application. That wiggle room means, I'm not willing or excited about doing what I think the Torah has asked me, so I'll just interpret it differently to suit myself. Whereas flexibility means that when the age, when the time, when the community needs a certain interpretation for reasons more than just convenience, that the Torah is not an inflexible document which cannot accommodate the differences in times, generations, and society, but in fact is flexible enough to still be applicable and still remain unabused, and cover that. So that's where I would use the distinction.
I think it's comparable to the way Congress should be using the Constitution.
Well, and that's one of the parallels, having just returned from a trip where we went to D.C. and went to the archives to visit our holy documents of this country. One of the things that I've always been struck with by the American Constitution compared to many others is our Constitution is very concise. Our Constitution is actually very, very short compared to many constitutions in other countries. And similarly, the Torah, despite what you may think, is actually a very short book, because God understood that the basic rules that were going to be necessary were not many. 613 may sound like a lot. Trust me, compared to any secular nation's law code, 613 is a drop in the bucket. Go look up Florida statutes and see just what number we're up to, and where in the tens of thousands we are. So what's more important is that you have the core that is necessary, plus the rules to how to apply them and interpret them. And that's what the American Constitution has done. It gave us the rules of the game of how we would make laws, and gave us the boundaries of what laws would or would not be considered acceptable, and then said, now go and govern. Go and use these tools to meet the needs of the people in every generation. We in 1789 can't tell you what the needs of every generation will be, but we can tell you that if you follow these rules, that you'll come up with laws that are American. And similarly, the Torah tells us we can't tell you everything you're going to need for the rest of humanity, because such a book would be bigger than the entire world. But we can tell you what the core values, the core teachings of God are, and we can tell you what God has instructed us as the methodology for understanding them and applying them. Go do it. Learn, study, discuss, apply, and continue to do so over and over again. And that flexibility is one reason why both the United States is still here and why Torah is still such a vibrant and meaningful part of our lives, as evidenced by all the people who are here studying it. Good. Well, with that, we will say farewell, and hopefully one more takeaway you'll have from this is Shabbat's really, really important. That Shabbat really, really matters for a lot of different reasons. And if you have not yet made Shabbat the most special day of your week, talk to me. We'll work on that. Take care.